All right, so in this video, we'll be doing a web app with Google Charts. So I'm gonna try to use an example chart from Google Charts, and I'll be, hopefully, if everything goes well, using some data from here. So the way Illinois reports their data, for me, is really confusing. So I wanna just look at it a little differently, and maybe as I'm doing that, we'll make a video out of it. So if you look here, see they have this like tested, cases, etc., all separated. First of all, the first thing I want to do, just have a chart that has all three of them side by side so that we can see the relationship between those three. And then as we move forward, maybe also look at percentages and things like that. But for that, we need to get the data, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get it from here. So I'm thinking I should be able to get their source from here. So let's see. So if I open the developers console, I think if we go to network, I should be able to get it from the requests they do. So if we, for example, click on this tested, let's see if that does a request. Yep, there's a network request, and it seems to be a JSON file. Open in a new tab. That seems to be JSON response. So let's see. Since they are building that chart from this, it should have the same data. So these are the totals. This is the other counties. Okay, so, oh yeah, by county. So state testing, historical maybe? Demographic, I don't care that much. So this seems to be just the numbers over time. So it's just adding the next day to it. I think I want something that's just daily. So let's look at this. This seems to be promising by the name. So 0 is the date out of that array, and values is what? Okay, so cases, total tested. That seems to be the totals again. So it's always going to be Illinois first. 76,000 here, and then 73,000. So basically, this is again just adding up cases over time. I was hoping this would be just daily cases. So it's just the totals. Well, I guess that's fine. We'll just take those totals, and I guess we'll use those to calculate the difference between the days. Okay, that's weird. It turns out we want to use this one from this JSON. Okay, so let's try to copy this link, go to our spreadsheet, try to call this, and try to populate that over here, hopefully, and then we'll use that data to do the web app. As usual, the script editor, we'll take this. I'm going to paste that in here. This will basically be the link. Let's just start by saving it in a variable. So we should be able to use URL fetch app. And if we fetch that URL, which is this, we should get a response, which should be this. And hopefully now we should be able to convert it to a JSON object by doing JSON parse the response. All right, so if this all goes well and it lets us actually call the API, which is possible that it will not, that should return some results. So let's just run this and see what happens. As usual, permission stuff. So if this returns data, we should be good. And it seems like it does. Okay, good. So in this JSON object, now we should be able to narrow it down to, what was it? State testing results and values inside of that. So let me run this to see if that actually returns this array or not. And it does. So we got the date and our 4 columns. So now we need to just take this and write it to our spreadsheet. So let me just add those columns to our spreadsheet. And to add it to our spreadsheet, we need to take that and convert it to an array of arrays. So let's just save it in a variable first. And I forgot what was in it. So let's just copy one of these as an example. All right, so let's map through this data. And that should have a callback. So for each row, we basically need to return a row as an array, and it should be a comma separated list. So it's going to be basically the test date, this, in the order we would like them. So the date is first, and I have to go back and take a look what I did. I think that's it. So if we save it in a variable here, and we'll log this out, it should hopefully be an array of arrays with our data, which means if that is, we should be able to write it to our spreadsheet. And it is. So now let's write it back to our spreadsheet really quickly. So I'm going to start writing that data from this cell, A2. So that's second row, first column. Number of rows is going to be however many rows we have in the data. So we'll get the length of it. And number of columns will be, well, in this case, 4, I guess. That's fine. We'll hard code that. And we'll set values to our values coming from here. So no more console log, just like that. Good enough. Let's run this and see if that adds the data to our spreadsheet so we can get to the next part. So as you can see, we got our data. Let's call it data. I'm going to go change this instead of get active sheet. Let's actually just get that worksheet by name. And that will be this worksheet. So now the way they present their data, it's basically just adding the next day to the previous day. So if we wanted to see how many we have this day, we have to see the difference between the previous day and today, which means if I did something like this minus this, and I could just drag this over for these 3 columns. And now if we just go back, that will give us the actual numbers per day. Okay, so that's good. So for the first day, it's basically just going to be whatever numbers we have here, so we don't have to do the math. So I'm not going to get this too complicated. We could do a fancy formula, I guess, but instead I'm just going to do this. There it is. I have my data. Now I want to use this data to build the report. I'm going to just make this date also show up next to this so that it's easier for me to grab that. It will just be equal to the other date. So this way I don't have to read all these extra columns I don't need. I'm just going to read this part. Now let's get to getting this data in our web app and building a chart out of this. So we're going to call it this. if we have a web app, there's always a doGet function, and it should return an HTML service. So we need an HTML file, which we don't have yet, but we're going to create it. And we are going to evaluate this. So that should do it. That should be enough for us to actually have a web app. Now we just need that HTML file. That should be called the same thing that I just called over there. Now let's go to our charts documentation and see what's happening here. So I'm going to go get started. Okay. So let's look at column charts. So I want some side-by-side bars. Let's see. Something like that. So this is their sample script. So I'm just going to copy that same exact thing and go to our app, delete all of this and paste it. So that calls their API. That's fine. And this is the script. Now, where is this putting this chart? Oh, there's this div ID and this is the size. Okay, fair enough. So this is the ID for this, which is referred to probably in here someplace and right there. Let's change this to our own ID. Okay, so basically, let's see what's happening here. What they have this load, and then they have on this drawback. Let me just look into this function, see what's happening. Where's the closing? So this whole thing is one function apparently, and it has this data object. It has options over here. Then it has this, which gets the ID of the element where we're adding this chart apparently. And then we have this, which I assume that's what draws the chart using this data. Okay. So that means this needs to run at some point. Where is this? Okay, so this is this callback. So it runs this function draw chart over here. Why don't we just save this and publish the app to see if this actually works? So I'm going to save this, publish, deploy as web app. And because I have doGet function, this should be fine. And I guess anyone. And let's look at our development latest code. And here we go. The chart is showing up here. Good. So now we need to populate this chart with our own data from our spreadsheet. So let's go to our backend and create a function to actually do this. We need to get the data. And for that, we need to get to our spreadsheet and the worksheet and get the range. I'll move this to a separate line here. Then we take that WS variable and do get range. Now we're going to start from the second row. Not first. We want this column E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth column. And the number of rows is going to be WS get last row -1. And then we need 4 columns. And because we have dates, I'm going to do get display values. And if that doesn't work, we'll just do get values and then decide how we're going to deal with dates. But display values basically is going to get us text instead of dates. I don't think we have to do a constant here. Let's just return it. So this function should let us get the data. Now, we don't want this function to be called by our web app. So I'm going to make it a private function like this. So at this point, I need to call this function on my HTML side and grab this data and populate the chart with that. What we're going to do, they have this on load callback, and they draw the chart. Now, instead of drawing the chart, which is what they do, we're going to do our own function in the middle there. Get data, and then we'll create that function. So after their library loads, it should, as I understand, do a callback to this function, and then we'll manually call this draw chart in our own function, and I hope that will work, but we'll find out in a little bit, I guess. So our function is going to call that Google script run and this function, and this function should return some data, so we're going to do a success handler. And that success handler is basically gonna get us this array of data, which is array of arrays. Now, according to what I saw here, this data they have here is also array of arrays. So I think if we just call this draw chart right in here as a callback after the success, we should be able to pass that data. We're gonna call it data returned, and that should be used in here. And now that I'm looking at this, there are column names in this as well, which means we probably should be getting this column names from our data too. Or we can just build this thing, but I'm just gonna pass this and go change it to actually return column names. So I'm going to go back to this, and now we're going to start from row 1 instead of row 2. We don't have to do -1 anymore because we're getting the whole thing. The rest is the same. So there we go. Now we have our function, and that should come back to this. So I'm not going to change anything else. I want to see if the logic that I'm doing here is actually working with their library. So let's just save and go reload this thing. And I think it does. Okay, it's just we have way too many days. So let's try to, for now at least, limit this to latest 10. I'm gonna go back here. Instead of just passing it right away to this, let's just try to get, let's say 10 days or 5 days or something like that. I'm going to do 5 days to see what happens and then go from there. So let's do this. And that's an array. So we should be able to slice it. And if we do 0 through 5, I think that should return the first 5 rows. And then pass that to this. Save it. Let's go back and reload and see what happens here. 0. This seems to be the first few days. Let's try to get the last few days instead of the first few days. The slice allowed to do negative numbers. So here's their docs. Let's see. Begin, end. A negative index can be used. Extract the last 2 elements in the sequence. So we should be able to do -5. That's nice. So we don't have to calculate anything. So -5. So let's reload this and see what happens. So the blue one is the number of tests. This one is number of cases. It's weird how it's putting this in this weird structure. So it appears to me like it's not recognizing that those are numbers, maybe. Oh, of course, we're getting display values. I guess that's why. So before I get to converting stuff, let me actually just test to see what happens if I just do get values. Does it give me an error because of the dates, or does it read them anyways? So save this. Let's go back and see what happens. Yeah, that's what I thought. So I'm trying to think on which side I want to deal with this, on the front end or the back end. I think I'm going to do the back end side. Let's take whatever we get here, convert the rest to numbers and the first column to whatever it is, so display values. So this should be an array, so let's take that and map through that array. And for each row in that array, we'll have a callback. And we have dates and 3 columns of numbers, right? So the first one is going to be what it is. So R0, we're going to return the dates as is. The second one should be converted into a number. So we should be able to do parse int, and integer should be fine here because those should be whole numbers in our case. And basically just repeat this for the rest of the columns. And we should be able to just return this, I guess, just like that. So if I didn't make any mistakes, hopefully this should convert these 3 columns to integers, and this should stay text. So I'm going to save this, go back and reload and see what happens. It's not good. So I need to run this function to see what happens here. That seems to be correct. Oh, there's this column names in the first column that we don't want to convert to integers. I guess I'll take that opportunity to rename these columns in my script since we have to deal with this anyways. So we'll do second -1. So that should give us the value starting from the second row. But that means we also have to add column names to the top of this. And then when we get that data, we'll still slice it to get the last 5. And then we'll take that and unshift the headers to it, which will add it to the beginning. And then hopefully now we should be able to use that in here. So let's save this, go back and reload. There we go. So now we have something that makes more sense. This is tests, cases, and here we go. Now, I'm thinking maybe we should have a drop-down or something so that we can select how many days we want. So maybe we want to change to the latest 10 days or 4 days or 15 days, something like that. And we should be able to do that. So let's go back and create something like that. So I'm going to go to my HTML here. Let's do a drop-down, I guess, above the chart. I'll just do a div here. I'm not going to do any fancy styling or bootstrap or anything. Just keep it old-fashioned. Good enough. So let's give this an ID. It's going to be on 5. But if we change the select box, we basically want to go back and reload this with the right number of days, which means we need to probably change this again, because right now this function is not accepting arguments to get different number of days. And it's also accepting this data, which we should probably store globally so we can access it later on. So we'll do that. So I guess I'm going to keep this for a second like this. Then I'm going to go on top and take care of these changes. So we're going to get the data. We're going to not throw the chart yet. So let's just create a variable on top here. And then after we get this, instead of drawing the chart, which is this, we're going to call another function. And that's going to be this function. And this function is going to accept that return data, which we then should be able to assign to this by creating a copy of that array. And I think if we do this, that should work. So now we'll set this global array so that we can call it again, and we don't need this anymore. So we should be able to just use this, or maybe we'll still do that so we can send a different data if we wanted to as well to that chart. So we'll do that, and we'll also do the number of days, I guess. So, and the way that days is going to work, it's basically going to be, if this is 5, it should be -5. If it's 10, it should be -10. So we'll just say 0 minus days, like this. So we should be able to set this data over here and then call this row chart function. And in that function, we should have access to this and the 5 by default. So hopefully, if I didn't mess anything up, this should work the same way. We should probably change this, but that's easy. So, well, we got the dropdown. That's not working. Let's take a look. Data returned is not defined. Okay. Oh, yeah, of course. I did change this variable name, so it's no longer data returned. Well, maybe that should be data returned. So we should just call it something that matches this. Okay. That's fine. Data returned, data returned. So I thought the problem was here for a second, but no. Okay. Let's try this again. Good. We got the chart. So the chart is here. Now we need this to work. So it gets us the last 5 days. So now if we change this to 10, this should reload a new chart with 10 days. So let's just create a function for that. And we'll need to go get that select box. So that's our standard document get element by ID, and the ID is days. I'm gonna move the script below our code for many reasons, including that it's easier for me to work. Okay, so we're gonna get this element, and let's just get the value of it. So this is gonna come back as text. We need to convert it to a number. And then once we have that, we should just run this again to redraw the chart. So the same data, but now we have different number of days. Now this function is not going to run itself. We have to tell it to run. And that's where we're going to assign an event listener. And I'm going to do it all the way down here. Let's just spell this right. Okay, so when it's not the chart, it's the element called days. When that select box called days is changed, we're going to run this function, which is that function that gets whatever the day is and runs the loading chart thing. So let's save this and reload this and see what happens. So we got our 5 days. So if I go and change this to, my mouse doesn't work very well, 10. There it is. We got 10, 15. So now we can just have this option for us to select number of days, and that will reload just like this. So let's rename this stuff. It says company performance and sales expense profit. Let's change that. And that's going to be this. Something like this. So now we should have a different title. And we have our chart, which we should be able to load like this. And we can kind of compare these side by side. And the chart dimensions are basically defined here. Apparently that's the actual style of the chart. So it's 800 by 500, which is this right now. So if you wanted that smaller, you can change it. And it should resize to fit. So this thing says date. I guess That's appropriate. I'm sure we can also give like axis titles and stuff like that. See, like this one has this axis titles. Let's see that example. Do we have to do series and this, or just one is enough? Let's just try to do only this. So that would be y-axis, I guess. That's correct. But we only have one. So this one is distance, which I don't think it knows what that means. And that's why they have, I guess, this. So series, it's going to be distance, so not distance. We'll just remove this. It's the first one. And we'll call this whatever we call this, I suppose. So that will be this. I think that should give us what we need. Let's try. Oops, maybe not. I think I'm missing a bracket. There it is. So that's our options, and these are these three. Save it, reload. Here we go. Number of people. So we have that on the left now. This one is called date. And you could also probably change it by replacing this column name to something else. So if you just say, I believe that should pick up that column name in there. Yep. And we could probably even use like this numbers in here as well. So we could say cases over days, which is that variable, which will be 5. And then we'll add something like days. So this way, if we go back and reload, and then if we change this to, let's say 15, should say 15. All right, I've just realized something is wrong here because this shifted. See, now we have cases, we have tests. They're not matching. I think we moved this axis to its own thing here, and this is on its own. And that has probably something to do with me doing this. When I assigned the first series to this, I should be able to fix that by basically doing all the 3 columns here, 0, 1, 2, and assign all of them to the same people, which is this. I think that should fix that issue. There it is. Now it's more like it. And again, we should be able to do this and this. And that works for me. And I think that's enough for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.